Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Gockley, co-chair of the Whatcom County Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. Thank you for taking your holiday to join us for this special and very important meeting.
No, it wasn't that way before.
I know.
Arlene, can you mute? Oh, because
Yeah,
we can.
I'm gonna help her mute just a second.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
We're having
Well-
issues with the sound on our end, like it's really distorted. I'm not sure if everybody else is having that experience.
No, we're not.
Okay, just wanted to check. Thank you.
Want to thank everybody for giving up their part of their holiday today and recognize that it is Indigenous Peoples Day. And somewhat in accord with that, we'll start with our land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. I'll call this special meeting to order. I'm very pleased to welcome back Arlene Feld to our fold. Glad to see you looking chipper, Arlene. Also probably should acknowledge with some sadness the passing of Judge Michael Bobbink, standard bearer for the municipal courts in the county. So as I said, this is a special meeting for the task force. We're honored to have Dr. Jennifer Schwartz and Dr. Jennifer Sherman from Washington State University, who have completed an assessment of our progress and occasionally lack thereof in regard to the recommendations made to the task force by the Vera Institute in its 2018 report, or 2017 report, excuse me. We're going to have a presentation from them. I hope you two will have a little time at the end for questions and discussion. They will also be presenting formally to the county council tomorrow. Barry, I'm not sure when that is. You can fill us in as we go, but people would be welcome to watch that discussion, which I'm sure will be at least as rich as ours. And so I'll turn it over to whichever one of you wants to take the lead. Welcome to you both, and thank you for your work.
Thank you, and thanks for having us here. I'm just going to share my screen real quickly, so give me 1 second. Does that look okay to everyone? Okay. Well, thanks again for inviting us here to this special meeting on today to present the report, the progress report toward reducing the jail population in Whatcom County based on earlier recommendations and strategies offered by the Vera Institute of Justice. So first, I'll just briefly introduce my research team, all of us from WSU, and I'll give you some background about the report and our methods. Then I'll give you a high-level overview of our research findings before I delve into the specifics of the Vera recommendations and their accompanying strategies, the steps the county has taken toward implementing those strategies, possible effects or outcomes, and then remaining challenges or future steps the county might take. So our research team, the Washington Rural Jails Network, is comprised of faculty and graduate students in the College of Arts and Sciences at WSU. And since prior to the pandemic, we've been working with jails in Eastern and Central Washington and rural communities to try to understand the drivers of their patterns and trends in their jail population. So we also collaborate with these communities, implementing locally derived solutions that are data informed, that they've identified as the most pressing. So we have in the past received funding from Arnold Foundation and Vera Institute in a grant partnership, but we don't have any current financial ties with them. Right now, the National Institute of Justice is our funding source when we work with rural communities. So we were well positioned to kind of carry out some of the evaluation work that your county needed done. So to introduce ourselves real briefly, I'm Jennifer Schwartz. I'm a quantitative criminologist in the Department of Sociology, where I've worked for 20 years. During this time, I've studied patterns and trends in crime and societal responses to crime, including incarceration, sentencing, and law enforcement. And I led most of the aspects of this project. I have with me today Dr. Jennifer Sherman. She and I have been co-PIs on our rural jails research, and here we drew on her expertise as a qualitative ethnographer to conduct in-depth interviews with stakeholders and consult about court observations, archival research, and those sorts of things. Her research generally focuses on rural poverty and rural communities in the Pacific Northwest. She's also a professor of sociology at WSU, as well as a Humanity Washington speaker. 4 of our graduate students, let me make sure I counted right. Yes, 4 of our graduate students played integral roles in this project: Christian Maynard, Emma Deneau, Safia Hafiz, and Seth Wood. And they were really integral to initial data collection and analysis, which I'll tell you a bit about now. So in terms of our research methods, from June through September, our research team worked with Whatcom County stakeholders to identify accomplishments and remaining or emergent challenges. We conducted an independent analysis of Whatcom County jail population trends, and we identified some best practices for moving forward. The Whatcom County staff provided a substantial amount of information to data to our team, and their experts had deep knowledge about their data collections, which we really appreciated. So we engaged in really thorough discussions with staff members about the meaning of the data and how it was collected and so forth. So we were able to receive jail admissions and release data, warrant data from the courts, and behavioral health program data. It's important to know that our team who accessed these data had fingerprinting and background checks and training to make sure that we could keep the data secure. And we did store it securely at all times. We had restricted access firewalls so that there were only certain people accessing the data, and it'll be destroyed after our team is done. So I just wanted to put that out there. We also obtained crime data from WASPIC's Criminal Justice Information Support Department and court statistics that were archived in caseload reports from the courts of Washington. And these data, when available, covered 2015 through 2023 or mid-2023. We took a virtual tour of the jail. We also conducted several hours of remote court observations over 5 days in Whatcom County District Court, where we observed mental health court, omnibus trials, entry of pleas, and non-appearances. And we were able to observe in Bellingham Municipal Court as well, where we observed arraignment, speedy trial waivers, and probation court. We conducted 4-hour-long interviews with key stakeholders from across the county's criminal legal system to try to better understand some of the practices and processes that you're undertaking and some of the accomplishments and hurdles that you're facing. So we did speak with people from different areas like the jail, all across the legal system and in behavioral health to try to get a well-rounded perspective. And in doing so, we tried to identify some common themes and insights, as well as some more specific points that inform the report throughout. A major task was identifying some top accomplishments over the past 6 years, which were numerous. So to identify these accomplishments, as well as challenges, county staff were asked to report on specific achievements and hurdles for each relevant recommendation and strategy that Vera offered. Staff offered supporting documentation when it was available, such as memos, reports, policies, and so forth. And our research team also sought confirmation independently based on searches of government records, archives, meeting minutes, news stories, and the like. So throughout our meetings and formal interviews and court observations, several themes really rose to the forefront in all our interactions as we were speaking to people. So we just wanted to elevate those at the outset. There was a really broad commitment to the process as a whole that the county has embarked on, and I think that's saying something. There is a real interest in addressing root causes of problematic behavior, a real emphasis on treatment and rehabilitation over punishment as an end in and of itself, and to really seek out promising, innovative approaches for addressing substance use, mental health issues and crises, and for enhancing the fairness and effectiveness of the local system, while also paying attention to negative consequences. All the actors we spoke to observed really spoke about the importance of fairness, treating people as individuals and with compassion, and being attentive to potential inequities or personal hardships. Actors really they broadly valued data-informed decision-making, and everyone voiced an openness to change based on evidence and feedback. Stakeholders also expressed the value they found in multidisciplinary approaches, attacking problems from multiple vantages to deal with these really complex social issues. Yet all the actors also recognize that these collaborations can really be challenging, as actors on the ground need to develop trust with one another, mutual understandings of each other's roles and professional norms, shared understandings and means of routine communication. So as everywhere, some people are resistant to change, to alternative approaches or to differing viewpoints. So as we turn now to a brief overview of the patterns and trends we observed in the data, and then our progress report, we hope you find our Outsiders Independent Assessment informative, and that you'll be inquisitive about what we found. But after the presentation, if possible, we'll save about 20 minutes, I hope, to take those questions. So first, we examined offenses known to the police for the whole of Whatcom County and for Bellingham only. Offenses are typically reported by citizens to the police, who determine then if a crime occurred and what type of offense it could be categorized. Numbers have gone down in Whatcom County as a whole, and once population growth is taken into account, rates of offenses known to police in the largest city, Bellingham, have also declined by about 20% since 2015. And the overall rate for Whatcom County has declined by about 27%, the overall crime rate. Thefts and burglary rates have declined too, whereas rates for other serious offenses were unchanged, except for perhaps a small uptick in assault. So we know that jail populations are a direct function of who goes to jail, who's admitted to jail, or number of admissions, and how long people stay. So first, I'll talk to you about admissions. So jail admissions were declining, and they declined about 10% between 2015 and 2019, which is forward progress. And then the pandemic severely curtailed admissions in 2020. And since then, rates have started to increase again, but still are far below pre-pandemic figures. This graph of monthly bookings shows that after the pandemic, pretrial bookings have started to rise again. So that's what's driving the new increase, whereas the number of those sentenced has remained flat. Use of book and release increased too, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And this has shifted the overall composition of the jail toward pretrial individuals and people who are there on felony level charges. Jail stays too have lengthened, for some being held pretrial as well as those who are sentenced. Namely, those who are charged with burglary or held on a warrant experienced pretrial stays that are about twice as long as those who were held earlier in 2015 to 17. And if we look at time spent in jail serving a sentence, those have also doubled or tripled, mostly since the pandemic, however. This could be because the number of court proceedings in district and municipal court has reached pre-pandemic levels. They've grown again. And the larger proportion of recent hearings are pre-trial, and that's signified by those the gray parts of the bars, compared to even before the pandemic. Oops, sorry. In Superior Court, the total number of active cases has remained the same even during the pandemic. And since the ratio of pending cases to resolved cases has increased. So in other words, cases aren't being resolved as quickly now. A strongly positive trend, however, is the reduction in jail recidivism since 2015. And I think this is pretty remarkable. So the likelihood of returning to jail within 2 years has decreased by about half in recent cohorts. And of course, we don't have more recent. We have to observe and see what happens to those who entered in more recent years. So the many positive steps the county has taken toward addressing underlying issues surely has contributed to that encouraging trend regarding recidivism. So now we'll talk more specifically about the particular strategies implemented, some of the potential effects of those changes, and remaining hurdles and steps to be taken. Of course, the jail population is influenced by many, many factors, larger social issues such as the pandemic, growth in the unhoused population, and other social factors, but we'll keep it contained to what we can observe here. So some of you might recall Whatcom County contracted with the Vera Institute to conduct a comprehensive year-long examination of your legal system. They did on-site observations, system mapping, meetings with elected officials and task force members. They analyzed the 2016 data from jails and courts and the like. And these efforts all led to the 2017 report that's been referenced repeatedly, and it contains 5 recommendations and 20 corresponding strategies. So my team was invited to assess these efforts to this point. So the report covers all of these strategies. Today, I'll highlight the majority of them, but a few I'll skip over or have combined just for timeliness. But we do highlight all the major strategies that have been taken and steps taken. So the first recommendation made by Vera was to reduce jail admissions via diversionary strategies. And the strategy more specifically that Vera recommended was to divert low-level offenses such as driving while license suspended, which I'll call DWLS from now on, and expanding book and release practices. So when I talk about book and release practices, I mean a law enforcement officer cites somebody in the field and then takes them to the jail for booking, fingerprinting, and mugshots, but then they're immediately released on personal recognizance. This is in contrast to, or similar, but in contrast to cite and release, which occurs entirely in the field, where law enforcement cites the accused to appear later, but does not detain them at all. So data on cite and release practices wasn't widely available except for the sheriff's office, but data did show that they consistently used that practice over the years, diverting about 12% or more of pretrial bookings, and that's the bars from 2015 to 2019 was almost entirely cite and release. Book and release practices really ramped up in 2020, and you can see that the share diverted jumped to about 25% of potential admissions. The majority who were cited and released in the field were charged with DWLS or other criminal traffic violations. And for book and release incidents, about 1/3 were arrested due to an outstanding warrant as a top charge. Other reasons varied, but tend to involve property crimes like larceny, theft, stolen property, burglary, and the like. So, because of these practices and this diversion, both in the field and at the jail, there have been fewer bookings for warrants, minor infractions like misdemeanors, like DWLS. And, as I mentioned earlier, a greater share of those are being booked on more serious felony level charges. So in 2022, over 700 people benefited from book, cite, and release practices when I combine them together. And when we project based on mid-year projections from 2023, nearly 1,000 people are expected to be diverted from the jail. So clearly these are effective practices in reducing the size of the jail population. Even though they're really effective, these practices are implemented and justified as being due to exigencies rather than a planned facet of Whatcom's law enforcement approach. So law enforcement morale may suffer when practices are perceived as maybe ineffective or damaging to the respect for law, or overly lenient when research counters those arguments. So when law enforcement can't see some of the positive effects of diversion to treatment, sometimes it also challenges adoption. But, as I mentioned, there are some real positives for reducing burdens on the court, on the legal system, fewer legal proceedings, lower court costs, lower incarceration costs, fewer citizen complaints against law enforcement, and averting hardships for the arrestees as well, of course, and connecting them to services. So I included a few resources in the report, the published report, 2 studies from the International Association of Chiefs of Police, one from 2016 and one from 2021, and a 2023 study from Duke that described these the most effective means of diversion. One highlight from all of these reports is the importance of efforts to improve officer perceptions of these programs if we really want to maximize their success. Another strategy to divert people from jail admissions, Vera suggested coordinating behavioral health care with the legal system, and Whatcom County truly excelled here. The GRACE program supports individuals out of mental health crisis and into stability and improved overall health and well-being. This program is meant to address the root causes of emergency service utilization. And as Vera recommends, GRACE is voluntary for participants. The program focuses on trauma-informed care and harm reduction and client-driven goals. Intensive and collaborative case management strategies are used in GRACE, and these are highly successful. Our independent analysis showed completion rates were really high, 70 to 90%, and clients' needs were often fully met. These needs were pretty intensive and ranged from housing assistance and other basic needs to physical or mental health and legal aid. And your own in-house analysis showed some reduced use of emergency services and less frequent jail stays for program participants. So these are really direct and indirect measures of the great successes of this program. The LEAD program is a bit newer, launched in 2020, but its enrollments are also growing. LEAD is meant to lead those with multiple low-level charges who are experiencing mental illness, substance use disorders, or extreme poverty into intensive case management and care coordination. We understand that nomination into this program is by committee. So other important advances are, of course, the co-responder programs for Bellingham and unincorporated rural areas of Whatcom County, where behavioral health specialists are deployed with law enforcement on calls relating to mental health crises. And this is in addition to the Sheriff's Office Behavioral Health Deputy Program. And the Ann Deacon Center for Hope open to assist with crisis stabilization for acute mental health care issues and for safe detoxification from substance abuse. So in terms of challenges and next steps, maintaining these high level of services offered by GRACE will take continued or increased investment. LEAD is expanding, but its completion rates fall behind those of GRACE, either because the program's new or the data aren't as strong yet, or the program may need more specified goals and standards of completion. Law enforcement in the field might also be further empowered to divert and connect those before arrest. The Ann Deacon Center is a valuable resource, but could be more fully utilized by law enforcement if its purpose and admission criteria could be clarified and the intake process streamlined, so it took less time out of the field and there was more certainty of entry. And in terms of coordinating behavioral health care with the legal system, the Public Defender's Office does not yet have any embedded behavioral health experts or resources, but individuals in this office are really well positioned to identify clients' needs. Another strategy suggested by Vera meant to divert jail bookings was to establish a sobering center. While one doesn't currently exist in the county, capital funding is being pursued for a 23-hour crisis relief center, which would serve a similar role. So the center would be a location where first responders could transport intoxicated individuals for short-term services and referrals for longer-term care. This center would provide a much needed alternative for people arrested for DUI who don't pose other additional risks. And the 23-hour crisis relief center would expand the continuum of care that the county could offer. As you can see, DUI continues to be a leading reason for jail stays. Most of these people, 90%, were released within 24 hours, which suggests that an alternative facility could securely house the majority of DUI arrestees. While some would benefit from intensive services and interventions, many DUI arrestees don't require that level of care, but nonetheless would benefit from services and referrals provided by a relief center. And it would help to address some of the underlying issues of substance use and abuse. The final strategy I'll discuss from this first recommendation related to diversion or diverting people from jail was to develop mechanisms to prevent jail admissions for technical violations of community supervision. So a technical violation can occur when someone doesn't comply with a condition of probation, community supervision, in other words, missing an appointment or failing a drug test, as well as committing a new offense. Vera recommended utilizing alternatives to jail and expanding the use of felony drop-downs, whereby pleading to a gross misdemeanor would allow district court supervision rather than an incarceration and then avert state probation violations. So the county reported extensive use of electronic home monitoring, transdermal alcohol use monitoring, and other devices that were used as alternatives to incarceration. The prosecutor's office reportedly formalized a program to direct file lower level felonies with the district court with a 6-month time frame for resolution and allowing district court supervision. And the prosecutor's office reviews in custody felony cases to identify when a lower level charges might be warranted. Probation violations did markedly decline as a reason for jail entry. Here we show the distribution of top charges, the most serious charge among those who served out time in jail. The percentage of those for a probation violation was really severely reduced, as cut in half from the 2015s to the 2021 to 23 period. So there was real success in preventing jail admissions for violations of community supervision. But an unintended consequence might have been that the percent entering jail due to failures to comply have doubled. So failure to comply might include violations of court-ordered release conditions, like related to electronic home monitoring, related to alcohol or drug use avoidance, use of ignition interlock devices, payment of fines or other stipulations. So we should watch the unintended consequences. So in consideration of this rise in failure to comply charges among those jailed recently, a 2023 research report by the Research Triangle Institute, included also in the reference list, provides objective research on the benefits and limitations of various technologies that one can use to monitor alcohol and drug use. And this is one source of failure to comply charges. The researchers here stress that the choice and intensity of monitoring ought to depend on an individual's risk level, with high-risk cases benefiting the most from continuous monitoring, whereas many would benefit from periodic or if any, monitoring. They also caution against this high risk of something called net widening, where increased monitoring and surveillance naturally leads to detection of more violations, right? So, or more failures to comply. So without necessarily improving general outcomes such as recidivism or court appearances. So prioritizing treatment over punishment, building in tolerances for errors and mistakes, ensuring the accuracy and validity of the testing equipment, and minimizing surveillance of low-risk cases is considered best practices. Regarding the strategy of drop-down felonies, we urge you to consider whether using felony drop-downs could be applied more widely when appropriate, particularly for theft and burglary charges. So this shows Whatcom County Superior Court. The felony theft and burglary filings in light blue, the light blue line, were up nearly 50% since 2019. And this is a much higher percentage than would be expected given offense trends. And these increases fully offset the major decline in drug crimes or drug charges shown by the yellow line after the Blake decision. So Vera's first recommendation was most extensive, and the county made significant strides in terms of diverting those with low-level charges from jail, expanding the use of book and release practices, preventing jail entry for probation violations, and expanding the continuum of care. So the second recommendation was to curtail new or outstanding warrants for low-level charges. And to do this, Vera suggested analyzing warrant data to better understand the problem. The county is moving toward this goal with data collection systems pending for warrant data, but has not been analyzed by the county itself yet. There is need, I think, as warrants still rank among the top reasons for entering jail. Another strategy that Vera recommends is implementing policies and practices to reduce bench warrants for court non-appearance, also known as failure to appear. The county has largely erased its use of failure to appear as a reason for jail entry. And during the pandemic, Washington's Superior Court severely curtailed use of bench warrants for failure to appear. Even so, the county has taken some steps to reduce the incidence of non-appearance by limiting charges filed for driving on a suspended license. Court non-appearances often relate to this charge, so curtailing these charges should have a positive effect downstream as well. A second effective policy has been allowance of appearance by defense counsel for certain stages of case processing, as well as remote court options that have likely also reduced court non-appearances. Some emerging challenges, though, relate to the increase in pretrial proceedings, especially in Superior Court, because this factor is the number of proceedings is related to non-appearances. So to increase court appearances, best practices tend to, they build a practice of meaningful court events that minimizes the amount of appearances and maximizes the progress toward resolution. Clients should be encouraged by the court themselves to enroll in notification systems, and applying and warrant issues for non-appearance could use willful flight standards or expressly use them or use them as an operating principle when considering reasons for court non-attendance. Bureau recommended that the county increase opportunities to resolve outstanding warrants, and the county did have a warrant quash day in 2019 that was held for all courts. This chart, though, shows that the number of warrants issued across Whatcom County district and municipal courts really dropped, probably due to the pandemic. But after more recently in 2021 and 22, warrant issuances are again on the rise. So there really is a need to understand and why they're happening and to prevent their issuance in the first place. So in addition to prevention, another warrant quash day involving all courts might be beneficial. Those who have warrants in multiple courts tend to have a harder time resolving their case, so it's important to have widespread involvement. And there are ways to increase effectiveness of warrant quash days, for example, assuring clients they wouldn't be arrested or made to pay on the spot. BURA's third recommendation was for the county to use individualized, data-driven risk assessments to encourage release on personal recognizance over cash bail, because even small amounts of bail were often too high for people to pay. As you'll see, personal recognizance has increased, but people who are assigned bail still struggle to meet those payments. An important strategy that Vera identified was ensuring defense counsel was present in all bail determinations. This is largely the case, but I'll talk about an exception in a moment. As well, release without cash bail in the gray part of the bar, or release on personal recognizance is on the rise, which is an encouraging trend. In terms of next steps, defense counsel should attend weekend probable cause hearings. Actors should collaborate on reviewing bail procedures to make sure they're working properly. And courts might expressly adopt, again, this presumption of personal recognizance unless risk is demonstrated. This is really important because, as I mentioned, even most people who were assigned small bail amounts were not able to post bail. So those who post bail typically were assigned amounts of $2,000 or more, with a third of people having bail set at $10,000 or more. But even those facing relatively low amounts, such as $500, did not secure their own release. Vera stressed the importance of implementing a court reminder system to facilitate release without cash bail and to help with improve court appearances. All courts have implemented text reminders for upcoming court appearances, for probation appointments, and for scheduled testing. District court also uses phone calls. Success rates of the text connecting with clients have varied across the courts, with about half the time in one court to nearly all the time in another court, but usually about 3 out of 4 attempts were successful. Some stakeholders reported issues with the system, causing confusion over continuances and the scheduling of moved court dates, cross-notification of individuals with the same name, and some other issues. And some clients were unaware that the reminder system existed. Defense counsel, too, can help ensure clients appear in court, especially if public defense resources are bolstered. Improving court reminders is one of the most effective ways to encourage court attendance, which is, very important for the court's functioning. There's new behavioral science that supports clear and more effective court reminders, as well as nuanced understandings of reasons why people don't attend court. Whereas many presume that non-appearances are intentional, rather than defiance or unwillingness to be accountable. In fact, most who don't appear for court face one or more challenges: managing mental health issues, serving as a primary caregiver or worker, navigating simultaneous cases, and even basic issues like securing shelter and transportation, or misunderstanding the process. Some were overwhelmed and fearful or intimidated by court actors and confused by the information. So flexible scheduling, introducing non-work hours or some choice might help, and especially providing pretrials resources like early access to counsel and support, some support navigating the legal system has been shown to really improve court attendance. A longer-term strategy Vera recommended was to adopt a pretrial, let me try that again. A longer-term strategy that Vera recommended to encourage pretrial release was to adopt and validate a data-driven pretrial assessment tool. Extensive evaluation of these tools were undertaken to find an instrument that produced fair and reliable results without worsening social inequalities. A multidisciplinary committee decided upon the public safety assessment tool, and it was adopted and is in use in the Superior Court. It's fairly recently implemented, however, so its local impacts aren't yet known. Stakeholders should consider guidelines for using the tool in decision-making, and the county should plan to evaluate whether the tool is working and to examine disparities in pretrial decision-making in the future. The final strategy under Vera's recommendation to encourage pretrial release was to establish pretrial services for all courts. Whatcom County has established pretrial services in the Superior Court to assist with monitoring individuals. So next steps would have the county expand pretrial services and furtherance of court appearances and service referrals, and to continue to address underlying factors related to both offending and to court non-appearances. Vera's fourth recommendation was to develop a case flow management plan that would reduce length of jail stays and hasten case resolution. They suggested a strategy to develop a case management plan that minimizes appearances, limits continuances, and thereby resolves cases quickly. Superior Court has a policy or implemented a policy to try to limit continuances, requiring that the court review for sufficient cause the request. However, due to inadequate time that defense often receive to review case files and meet with clients, this policy could be challenging. Caseload limits and conflicts also have slowed the assignment of defense, which has also delayed cases. A common theme throughout, I guess, is that public defense resources could be bolstered. And some interim sort of solutions would be to hold good faith settlement conferences between prosecution and defense earlier to deflect the need for additional hearings. A lack of a case processing data system has proved challenging too, to monitor case performance and to track backlogs. Available data that we analyzed did suggest that case resolution rates have slowed rather than hastened over time. This could be due to the steady number of case filings throughout the pandemic and the growth in the number of pretrial proceedings. So developing means to reduce these proceedings and to minimize appearances is needed. Vera's final recommendation was to create oversight and accountability mechanisms. And the first strategy involved reconvening a Law and Justice Council with staff, meetings, and research capacity. This was successfully accomplished when in 2019, the County Council adopted an ordinance designating an ongoing council with oversight functions as required by state law. The Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force, as you know, was formed in 2015 and comprised of a broad range of experts from across the legal system and law enforcement, policymakers, behavioral health and service providers, members of the public, and consumers of services and so forth. The IPRTF has one dedicated staff member from the council office and relies on staff in other departments and subcommittees to assist with research. Staff also have the capacity for grant writing. Monthly meetings and additional subcommittee meetings are open to the public and in hybrid format with past meeting minutes and such archived online. As you know, there's 4 subcommittees that work on criminal, legal, or behavioral health issues. One being the Crisis Stabilization Facility Committee, a Legal and Justice Systems Committee, a Behavioral Health Committee, and the Index Committee, which I'll mention again in a minute. The task force produces an annual report that also introduces innovative programs used elsewhere or entertains recommendations for change. So this is all as Vera would recommend. Vera also recommends reporting and publishing data regularly to ensure transparency and accountability. And here the county has really excelled. It's adopted the Gelada integrated data platform that interfaces across emergency service data to allow real-time coordination as well as program evaluation and other inquiries. Many county entities produce annual or more frequent or specialized reports that are readily available on the web. A data dashboard, a public data dashboard, is reportedly underway and nearing completion. And finally, the Information Needs and Data Exchange Committee of the task force meets regularly with the goal of improving data systems and information sharing, and has been successful in identifying data, metrics, gaps, and opportunities. Many of these data systems track demographics such as gender identity, race, ethnicity, and housing status as a vulnerability. Vera encouraged collecting data on race, ethnicity, and gender at all system points, so this is good. The jail now collects self-reported data on demographics, but an unforeseen downside has been an increase in missing data. Another challenge has been that data systems treat Hispanic ethnicity differently or different over time, making comparisons challenging. So as already noted, court data and performance measures are not as readily available to the public or to court actors themselves. And an integrated case management system that hopefully is on the way to all courts may increase access to information that's needed. And additional data analyses are needed on case processing, reasons for court non-appearances, and warrants that are prominent locally. As in many places, data systems remain siloed, but future efforts to integrate data platforms could assist those on the ground to get information they need as they need it, as well as to inform broader efforts and to understand what's happening, why, what could be done about it, and to what effect. Data analysts who can make good use of this information would also prove valuable. So to briefly sum up, Whatcom County has been highly successful in implementing many of the strategies suggested by Vera and took significant steps forward on others. Namely, the county saw its greatest successes in diverting low-level charges, law enforcement increasingly using book and release practices, the prosecutor declining to file standalone DWS charges, and probation violations being reduced. The county made great strides in expanding and coordinating behavioral health needs through Grace, LEAD, co-responders, and Ann Deacon. Release on personal recognizance increased due to a variety of reasons, such as counsel being present at most bail hearings, expanded options for home monitoring, and adoption of pretrial risk instruments. Pretrial services and court reminders now exist. And since the Vera report, Whatcom County formalized a highly active Justice Council that's made great strides in data transparency and issuing reports and whatnot. In terms of work that still remains, immediate steps might include articulating goals for booking restrictions and empowering and training law enforcement to use diversion. Behavioral health diversions that have been extremely successful and in strong demand will need to maintain or increase its resources in order to continue to meet client goals and needs. Other markers of success have been reductions in recidivism and less intensive use of resources. And so continued investments will certainly pay off. Work remains to address underlying causes and to alter system policies that lead to jail stays for DUI, warrants, and assaults. We didn't really address assault here at all, but domestic violence figures really prominently among reasons for jail stays. So additional resources to address these issues would be warranted. Enhancing public defense and pretrial services could increase court appearances, connect clients to services, and help people navigate their way through state bureaucracies, treatment services, and other challenges. And finally, numerous parties expressed interest in seeking ways to reduce case filings in Superior Court, which would have positive downstream effects on the jail population. So we've listed a few of the key references we used here, and I'd refer you to the full report for some additional citations. And that's all we had, and we're happy to take questions and listen to your comments and suggestions. And I'll stop sharing now so we can see each other, but thank you for your attention.
Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much. A huge amount of information, pro and con, gathered and analyzed in a very short amount of time. It's really helpful to us. Thank you, Dr. Sherman. I would open up for particular questions or comments, and I'll start, not surprisingly, with Prosecutor Ritchie.
Yeah, surprisingly, because I don't jump into these things so fast, but I have a few bones to pick. And the first thing I have to say is that warrants are a valid reason for people to stay in our jail. It means that people have failed to appear, and it means that there's little likelihood of holding any sort of accountability for them. I mean, that's something that should not be ignored by you or by our community. So I think folks need to understand that. You talked about public defenders needing more help. Well, there's also prosecutors need more help. I think we talked about that when you interviewed me. Prosecutors, the caseloads are 187 in felony courts here. It's 70 on our comparable prosecutors in other counties, and that's unheard of. We're at numbers that are remarkable, and just that also should not be ignored. We talked about resolutions and reasons for resolution. You mentioned that the prosecutors continuing to file cases during the pandemic as a reason for lack or poor resolution rates. I'm kind of curious how you came to that conclusion, but I have to also say that you did not mention the court's responsibility, and the courts have a great ability to induce people to resolve their cases, and they haven't had that. They haven't taken advantage of that in a way that they could, and they haven't had the ability to do it in the way they've done in the past. So resolutions have been are something that I think needs to be laid more at the court's feet than you did in your report. I think that's about all I have to say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Dr. Schwartz or Dr. Sherman, any response to that?
I can respond. I don't think I disagree with what you're saying. I thank you for your comments, and I hope that I'm just presenting information, right? Like, there's this many warrants that are happening, and this, that, and the other thing. So what it's for your county to decide who how you want to use your jail, right, and who ought to be there. And so and certainly I couldn't tell from the data we had what the original reason for a warrant being issued, right? So there's some very good reasons why people should be in jail, right? And warrants can hold them there. So I'll say that. But as far as I hope I didn't imply, over the over the pandemic, it was the case that case filings remained fairly similar, right? And case resolution rates declined thereafter. I think everybody that we spoke to acknowledged the crisis mode that the pandemic threw agencies in, courts, prosecution, defense, and so forth. So I guess I'll just say that it certainly was, that crisis mode. The case resolution rates really slowed after the pandemic, right? So there's many reasons why that could be, not only prosecution filings.
Thank you. Raylene.
Thank you. I have a few questions. So please let me know if you need me to stop in between any of them. So the one thing I didn't see on there is anything about individuals that were processed in Whatcom County but transported to Yakima. I think that ended in 2019 due to contractual issues. But how many of those cases actually went to Yakima and would have been in Whatcom County, and how those numbers would have changed some of the data that was presented, or if that was looked at and I just didn't see that. So that's one area. As Eric Ritchie pointed out, warrants, I'd be curious the number of felony warrants that were in jail versus misdemeanors, because misdemeanor bookings weren't authorized for a lot of issues due to jail restrictions. So that's something that should have been looked at. And when you come out of, and maybe it was, maybe I just missed that. When you're looking at the warrants, and I'm curious if we had at least information on addresses. So Whatcom County being a unique location on the I-5 corridor with Canada on one side of it, definitely has an impact for people that might not be from the state, might not be from this country, and how that plays into the warrants that are issued. I think the other thing I had questions on, you specified DWLS, driving license suspended cases. I think you were more referring to DWS thirds than firsts or seconds. So that's something that I'd like a little bit of clarification on, as well as driving while license suspended thirds changed in 2021 due to Pierce County. Actually, it was Pierce v. DOL in Pierce County that changed that statute and basically gave everybody a clean slate. We are now just starting to see DWS thirds pop up again as the citations changed in January of 2023. So that would be an interesting thing to monitor as time goes on, because for about a year there, we didn't see a lot of DWS thirds in the past. So I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Yeah, so on the first question about being transported to Yakima, yeah, there, I'm thinking about a chart I was showing with release reasons and holds and transfers. Yeah, it crunches down to nearly nothing after 2019. So if somebody was booked into the jail, they were recorded as an admission, and we recorded, or we looked at their top charge and things like that. And so if they were then later transported, they were still counted as an admission. I can see that holds really have dropped off to holds or transport. So somebody being held and then transported to another facility, or in other words, the release reason being a transfer to another facility, has really declined quite a bit in the county. And I suspect that would be why. Yeah, the distinction between felony and misdemeanor warrants is a good one. I have to look back at our data requests, and but I don't think we can tell that. The issue of out of people who live out of the county and maybe leaving, we observed that in some of our court watching, an individual from Canada who wasn't coming back to serve their warrant, right? And that just kind of, went away. So certainly that happens, but we have no way to sort of analyze that in the data so much at this point. Thank you for the information about DWLS. I think the numbers were reducing, I believe, before 2021, but that I'll pay attention to those changes, and I think it'd be interesting to see what happens in the future.
Thank you. And before we move on, I'll just ask people, for the benefit of Dr. Schwartz and Dr. Sherman, identify your role, please, because sometimes the perspective that you're bringing to that could inform their response to it. Of course, Eric Ritchie is our county prosecutor. Raylene King is court administrator for Blaine Municipal Court. And I will now call on Superior Court Judge David Freeman.
Thank you, and I apologize for having my video off, but I'm on vacation and nobody wants to see me in my hoodie today. So I just had a couple of things to comment on. One was there was a correlation between court proceedings and more warrants, and I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page, that prior to court rule changes, the first time a person had to appear and be present were status conferences. If they did not appear, a warrant would typically be issued. Now, status conferences, as long as they've been in contact with their attorney and their attorney can represent their wishes, the far majority don't have to appear. But here's the problem. If they don't appear, it then goes to the trial call calendar, which they already had previously. So essentially, if they don't appear at that, the same person that would have gotten a warrant on the status, it goes over to the, so you have two court proceedings. And where I'm going with this is, there's going to be a bit of a skew here on the number of court proceedings. That was another point made. One is you're having two to issue a warrant, whereas it was previously one. And the second is that the additional court proceedings that the court has added have been proceedings that don't require defendant appearance. And they're meant to move the case along. So we've added an omnibus hearing that is supposed to be a meaningful understanding of whether the parties are actually ready to go. And we've also required court hearings for continuances if they're over a threshold period now, so that they can be justified. That is going to add court proceedings, but it's not going to add more warrants, because we're talking to the attorneys, not necessarily the person being charged. The other issue that I just wanted to address was the resolution brought up by Mr. Ritchie. I'm not sure where the court can further step in the resolution when we've added reasons for continuances. Those are both formal. We've adopted court rules. Omnibus, again, a court rule, and informally, we're now requiring discovery cutoffs and discovery timelines if attorneys are telling us they're not ready. Ultimately, however, if an attorney representing someone tells us that they are not prepared and cannot be ready to go, it is very difficult to move that case along. So we are adding court proceedings, admittedly, but those are meant to move the cases along, not require additional appearances by the defendant. So I just wanted to clarify that. I appreciate the report, and I'm in agreement generally with it. Just wanted to make that clarification.
Thanks, Judge Freeman.
Yeah.
Eric.
Thank you. I appreciate what Judge Freeman just said, and I agree with him wholeheartedly that the court's made additional efforts to be involved in overseeing continuances, because continuances are the problems. That's where we do not resolve cases. The case just bumps along and just doesn't end until somebody puts their foot down, and the person who can put their foot down is the court. And as I said, I appreciate the court being more involved, and I wholly appreciate the work that they've done there, but there could be more. And that's what I was trying to get at. And if we want to talk about specificities, we sure can, but I don't know that this is the forum for that. And I have to go back to the issue of resolutions and the fact that they slowed during the pandemic. And Dr. Schwartz, you indicated that was a factor for I guess the slowing of resolutions, the fact that we kept filing. And I still don't understand how that's correlated. I will say that we did file. I feel it's right that we filed. If we didn't file, we'd be leaving people just victims alone without cases being filed, and that doesn't seem right. So we did continue to file, and I think that the sheriff would support that. I think that our community would support that. I think our entire community would support the fact that we kept filing because when people committed crimes, and we didn't just let them go by the wayside because we had a pandemic. At this point, I'm asking the question: what is the correlation between us continuing to file and resolutions not happening today?
Yeah, I guess I was just contrasting it to the major dip in crime. And of course, it's general. And, we looked at a couple of different types. And I don't know if they're felony level or not, right? So it is purely correlational. I guess in other jurisdictions, there was a really big dip in court filings elsewhere. And when courts slowed to a halt and even closed, cases that were already in the works slowed down, right? And then there were more added on top of that. So I guess I was just contrasting it between, offense rates at the time and how what other jurisdictions have done. And based on sort of the qualitative interviewing, people talked about sort of how the pandemic in and of itself, put organizations into crisis mode, less able to do its routine normal functions. So that,
Thank you, Dr. Schwartz. Heather.
Good morning. I hope I'm not garbled. I'm on hand again, rushing out to Linden Middle School for a presentation. First, thank you so much for your work on this update and the research. It allows us to even have these debates and conversations about the data, and that's so important for progress. Second, but potentially not for you, but kind of a flag, I didn't think conceptually the 23-hour crisis center would also serve as a sobering center. So that'd be good for the task force to discuss at some point. And third, a question for you that's tangential, but because of your expertise, I'm wondering when communities have had booking restrictions and or conversely, when there isn't restrictions and even new facilities to hold people who are committing crimes. What are you seeing in terms of impact on crime rates in communities? Do they go up or down or any impact at all?
That's a great question. And I wish I could give you a more direct answer. And I was shocked at how bad or non-existent even the research was out there to look at the impacts on I guess recidivism or crime rates generally of booking restrictions. I guess I would just, and looking correlationally, right, if the booking restrictions have been going, it doesn't, I don't have a good answer for you. There doesn't seem to be a connection between crime rates rising, but I can't point to a cohesive body of studies yet. I think it's fairly not well known yet. And I think, if you look at I think at a macro level, we know, crime rates aren't going up in places where booking restrictions are in place. About 80% of law enforcement agencies use some sort of booking restriction. So they're pretty common and widespread. What we know less about, I guess I should say, is, does an individual who is booked and released go out and commit another crime over, a given period of time? We don't have the answer to that. But crime rates don't seem to increase in communities that are using book and release practices, but they're widely varying in how expansive or what they're used for. And so where they seem to work best is where there's consensus around what they're being used for and why, from all the way from law enforcement up, through the legal system. So I don't know, maybe that was a somewhat of a vague answer, but sorry, it's the best I can do. But thank you for the question.
Thank you. Maya.
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to talk about adding court proceedings, and I can appreciate that the court is now more closely monitoring continuances and having input in that where they were having none before, and also that they're more closely monitoring the disclosure of discovery to the defense and setting deadlines for that for the state. Those are good things, but I just have to note that adding court proceedings means my lawyers are sitting in court for more and more hours each week. We have court every day of the week, and attorneys sit for hours. And we do, in many instances, have the opportunity to appear by video, and that can be effective in some cases and with some clients, and in other instances, it's important to be there in person. But even if you're paying attention on Zoom to waiting for your case to get called, it's sort of difficult to dive deep into things or schedule victim or witness interviews or do other meaningful work. So there are costs to that. While that may be an effective tool, if we've got then the lawyers sitting in court for hours and hours every week, they actually can't be working on their cases and move them forward. So there's a balance, and that's the struggle we face. Thanks.
If it wasn't obvious, Maya is the chief criminal public defender. So Raylene, you're next.
When you discussed court closures just a little bit earlier, I guess I would be curious on what courts actually closed and for what length of time, because speaking from Blaine, we never closed during the pandemic. We did have struggles with jury trials because we had to be able to safely figure out how to do that, or we delayed those, and some warrants didn't get issued during the pandemic. But actually closing the court, I was here. I never left. So what courts actually closed in Whatcom County would be my question, and for what length of time, so how that correlation actually is accurate. On people reporting crimes, I mean, we're looking at all the data internally. I guess I would be curious, as Heather pointed out, with individuals that maybe know that there's restrictions, that officers maybe aren't charging individuals that they normally would have because it might just cause more problems, knowing that there's not a place for them to be held. I know I've heard from people in the public that says, I don't even bother. I know nothing could happen right now with the Blake decision and the Pierce County decision, and all of the different legislative changes have definitely had an impact to the public as well. So I think it'd be really interested in seeing the public's perception on whether they're actually reporting crimes that they would have before all of this happened. So thanks again.
Yeah, and sorry, maybe I didn't mean to imply that Whatcom County Court shut down. I was talking more about, the state and the country as a whole, and some of the Eastern and Central Washington courts that we talked to. Yes, administrators were going in, but trials weren't being held. Witnesses wouldn't come over, wouldn't appear, right? Experts wouldn't appear. So maybe I'm exaggerating by closed down or speaking in hyperbole. But yeah, I don't know if any courts closing down, but they certainly slowed down. I think we can agree about that. And yeah, the issue of offenses known to the police, I mean, those do rely on citizens reporting. And if they feel like nothing's done, I mean, the question is, has that changed measurably over time? Of course, we can't really know. I guess I will just say that citizens in the US tend to think crime is increasing, and they've thought that every year, regardless of actual crime trends. So I think, what's very visible to people is what really shapes their perceptions. And so if the unhoused population is growing or other things like that, it may seem more visible and may shape people's perceptions, whether or not they call law enforcement. What law enforcement does is another question. But I think it's certainly the case that we tend to perceive higher crime rates that as Americans than are typical or than are really happening.
Thank you. Judge Freeman.
Thank you. Two things. First, I forgot to thank Dr. Schwartz for her work on this. It is much appreciated. Second, and Maya kind of beat me to this, but I wanted to finish my thought on appearances, and that was that we understand that it takes a toll on the parties as far as the attorneys involved. And I want to get back to what Eric said as well, because as the bench, we're looking at the fact that the state, is running twice their caseload. The defense or PDs are constantly at case level counts. So they're having to move cases out of the office, and both offices have dealt with turnover. So even in cases where maybe it's been worked for 6 months properly, it has to be handed over, and you have a significant felony case now with a new attorney, and that's going to take time. So we're all concerned about continuances. I do understand court time definitely gets into that, but I think ultimately that gets back to the staffing issue that I know this report has concluded as an issue. Eric has mentioned it, and I think Maya was getting at that as well, that this does come down to a staffing issue, and we need parties to be able to be prepared.
Thank you, Judge. Chief Mertzig, please.
Good morning, Rebecca Mertzig, Chief of Police for Bellingham. Was kind of curious about the police morale research. It kind of sounded like if there was more messaging about the effectiveness of book and release, set and release. I'm curious if that's true when that's their only option. We've had we've had booking restrictions for a significant amount of time. And so, you know, it's not necessarily satisfying to book someone into jail. I think where the morale happens is when you're running into the same person for the third time that day, stealing cartloads of things, and they say, hand me my ticket, because they know they're not going to be booked. So I was just curious if that was in play with that particular body of research.
Yeah, I think you know, you hit it on the head, right? Is that it feels like it's exigency, and maybe that's the case. And it's not so much, right, that the law enforcement feels like they want to put people in jail, but they want to solve problems, right? And they want to help their communities. And so sometimes when the booking restrictions aren't part of a cohesive plan, or aren't you know, when it seems like you need to do it instead of want to do it, right, it is a bit demoralizing. So it does tend to be more effective when law enforcement is sort of empowered to do this and given the resources to help divert people to something. I think, to your point, right, that they have to be diverted to something. So that's what's, you know, the more effective practice, I guess.
Thank you. I lost track of hands. It looked like there was some jumping around there. Perry, I thought you were first in line. I'm going to let you go since Judge Freeman has had a couple opportunities.
Thank you, Stephen. First, thank you, Dr. Schwartz, Dr. Sherman. Really appreciate the information and the efforts and energy that have gone into the data and reporting. A couple of pieces that might be helpful for you that I just saw as a lot of information. The 23-hour crisis relief center, Whatcom County has actually received funding. The PowerPoint indicated that they were pursuing that, so I thought that I might update that for you. We received $9 million from Department of Commerce, and there are some additional dollars actually that are available from ARPA funding. And to Heather Flaherty's point, the 23-hour crisis relief center is actually by legislation, if you will, a sobering center. It's a sort of a general catch-all term, but it is oriented towards both mental health triage support as well as substance use support for individuals. So in essence, it would fit that through legislation and et cetera. One of the things that I also thought that I would offer is I didn't fully introduce myself. I'm a supervisor with the Response Systems Division in the Health Department, which is part of the GRACE LEAD programs that are included in the Response Systems Division. And certainly have heard and been in meetings talking about increasing GRACE and LEAD resources as a strategy. Certainly, you know, a consideration. One of the things that I did want to make clear for everyone that is attending is that both GRACE and LEAD are case management outreach programs. There is no behavioral health service component in those programs other than the outreach and support of individuals getting connected to resources and so forth. So, and it was made reference to certainly in your PowerPoint, elaborating, developing further behavioral health services within the community. My point being that, you know, increasing GRACE and LEAD is almost more of a holding process if we don't have those behavioral health services that are available. So wanted to share that information with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Perry. I lost track of Judge Freeman. I didn't want to do anything more than nudge him back one slot.
No,
Judge Freeman?
No, Mike, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Eric, you're back.
Thank you. Yeah, first off, Dr. Schwartz, I wanted to say that I appreciate your work. I should have said that in the beginning. I was a little fired up, but yeah, you know, you put a lot of information in this. You did a lot of work, and I can tell, and I really do appreciate what you did. You made some comments about theft and about reductions and things like that, and how, you know, the prosecutor's office could employ more reductions, and I agree with that. It's been a complicated thing. We look at cases and we look at how much theft has happened, in a particular event at the store, for instance. We look at you know, the history of the person. We look at what kind of pending matters they might have, and for instance, if they have 3 or 4 shoplifts that are pending in Bellingham and they're committing a felony theft, we think, gee, you know what? Bellingham really hasn't been able to take care of this. And I know that they have struggles getting people into court. I mean, I just know that. And I know that sometimes a felony might be the last resort of something that can happen. So, you know, again, we're looking at things very carefully, and each case, each individual, but it's complicated, and it's been confusing to the public defender. They're concerned about our practices. It's been confusing to some of our prosecutors. They're concerned about our practices, and they, you know, because we want to ensure that people are treated fairly and similarly and things like that. And in fact, one of the prosecutors in my office has been so concerned that he wants to take over the whole issue and develop some policies that might really, I guess, demystify the systems, because right now it's just me looking at them and trying to decide, you know, what amount of justice does this person need to stop this behavior. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that because you had made the comment suggesting that we could make more reductions. But again, I thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, and there's so much discretion involved in this, right? And you know, as I said in the outset, everybody came into this process with me like wanting to be fair and do the right thing, and so I do appreciate that. And yeah, I want to make sure that that is clear. That
Linden Mayor Scott Cortice.
Yes, Mayor Scott Cortice, no expert in any of this, but a listener to all of it. I guess there is this sense that since we're doing a lot of book and release and not putting people in jail, there's a sense that crime has increased. And that would be the public perception. That's what I hear. So I guess I would like, I mean, as we do this, some more data on that and whether police departments just aren't, you know, booking people because they know it does no good, or that type of thing. Is there a correlation or not between what we're doing and increased crime? Because there's some other factors out there that all, you know, there's a lot of other factors, but if you just did this factor and crime, you'd say, well, we see the results. And another question I have is the report. I assume it's publicly available, and I guess could it be sent to this group so we can all review it when we have time?
Jenna will make sure you get that, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the crime thing is so challenging, right? And I wish I had a good answer for you. And, you know, your population is growing too, right? So there's a difference between numbers of crimes, right, and rates of crime. But even so, you know, and it's in Bellingham, numbers are up a little bit, right? But once you account for population, it's not. So it does make the perception of the population is really challenged, right? And it's all local, right? It's what's happening locally is what people see and care about.
Well, and I, you know, just recently Target announced a bunch of store closures, a couple of them in Seattle, and it's probably related to some of the state law changes. But, you know, again, it points to, you know, we're trying to do these things, and people will point to that and say, well, see, look at the result. Major retailers are pulling out because you can't control crime. So the unintended consequences, I guess somehow we have to factor that in here. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Scott. Executive Sidhu.
I think I was going to say the same thing, that when I go out in the public, I've been giving specific examples. The guy walks in Home Depot, fills up their own bucket, picks up the bucket, fills up with tools, and walks out. No consequence. There is an incident at Fred Meyer, local Fred Meyer. Lady is standing in line. It's somebody in front. I just wanted to take 2 minutes because this is important, how public perception is. A guy walks in front of them, walks with groceries, and nobody does anything. And she pays $43. She said, you mean I could have just walked out and I didn't have to pay $43? She said, that's right. You can walk out with $43 worth of grocery and nobody will ask you a thing. Is that what we want to have public perceive that? I'm unable to answer these questions. People talk saying, you know, oh, there are people in the jail, they should not be in the jail. How are we going to balance this thing when such perceptions exist that, like the chief, Bellingham chief said, when people say, nothing's going to happen to me. It is really important for us to hold people responsible. The whole purpose of jail reforms, whole purpose of all these things we are trying to do, treatment over punishment, all these things are great. And we are willing to put money behind it and bring those changes. But at the same time, we must find ways to hold people responsible for their actions. When we lapse on that, the system collapses. When people perceive, system collapses. So I have been out this year because of my election. That's the biggest question I face, and I have no answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Satpal. Mayor Fleetwood. Seth, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Lots of good information here. As it relates to the public perception issue, I would just share that perhaps we should consider putting together some kind of release from this data just to share with the public, because it could convey the complexity. We could be balanced about it as to the degree we are able. But also, I think it is important to recognize that, at least by some measures, crime is actually down. And I don't want to oversimplify that, because I recognize that part of it is, well, it's complicated. But I just wanted to comment on in our world, or my world, it's constant increased demand for services with the reality of having limited resources to respond. So as it relates to prioritizing, that's just where my brain went today. A process by which we can reach some broad agreement amongst ourselves as to what might be some first steps that we can take in trying to find more resources to assist in this whole thing. The object is to continue making progress. And so I just want to put out there that if there's a time when, Stephen, perhaps to you, where we can just reflect on how this group might come together in identifying priorities for implementation, given the reality of higher demand and limited resources. Thank you.
Very worthwhile suggestion, Mayor Fleetwood. Thank you. Eric, I'm going to make you the last questioner, and then we'll check in on public comment.
Well, I hate being the last person, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about perception, since we just heard from both Seth and Satpal about it. And, some other things that are going on are, we have community security. We have security downtown, a private company that's doing things that police used to do. We have at the Fred Meyer, we have security guards. We have them in other stores as well. And that's kind of a new thing, to make sure that people are kept in order where that wasn't needed in the past. We have addiction issues and mental health issues just running amok in our community, and these are the things that we have to do to respond to that. It is a difficult situation. It's we're relying heavily on data, and I know that data is important, but there are some realities that the rest of us see when we're in their community as well. That's all I have.
Thank you. And I'll immediately eat my words, because I'm not going to shut down Councilmember Buchanan. Barry, do you have some comment?
Yeah, I wouldn't have jumped in so fast, but you said that was the last comment. I did want to say one last thing before we left the subject today. And I'd like to thank our staff out of the council office, Kathy Halko, who's not here today, but she was along with me with the project manager of this project. And she worked really hard to keep everything on track and on schedule. And I'm pleased that we made our dates. And thank you, Jennifers. You got a couple Jennifers. I got a Jennifer in my family, my daughter. So anyway, great report. You guys really did a great deep dive. Thanks for all the participation, everybody. Eric and Judge Freeman, appreciate your comments so much. Chief, from Bellingham, and of course our executive and our mayor. So anyway, again, thank you so much for the report, and Stephen, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Barry. I'm going to open it for public comment in just a moment, but I wanted to reiterate my thanks for the work that you two and your team have done. I'm gratified to see that a lot of the questions you raised are things that are already on our radar screen that are under discussion. We may feel like we're plowing through molasses to try to get through some of these issues, which have multiple impediments in them, but I think we're on track. I also appreciate your recognition of some of the progress we've made, because I think there are some things for us to be proud about here also. So we're not done with the task force, lots of work to do, and I think you pointed out where some of those key steps are, so thank you. I will ask Jenna to open for public comment. I just want to start by recognizing that under RCW 4217A.555, the use of public facilities, such as the task force meeting, to support or oppose candidates or ballot issues is prohibited. Members of the public and the legislative body are not allowed to speak in support of or in opposition to a ballot measure or individual candidacy during an open public meeting like this. Please refrain from raising campaign issues when addressing the task force. So Jenna, do you want to see if there's any public comment from the attendees?
Of course. Thank you, Stephen. So we do have a number of attendees. If you would like to speak to the task force, go ahead and raise your hand virtually by clicking the raised hand icon, or by dialing *9 if you're dialing in by phone. So first we'll go to Jason D. Navores, and then we'll go to Michael next.
Those are my kids. I know, but it's just like I can't.
And then Jason, if you want to unmute.
We've gone to the emergency vet too many times. Let me know what insurance you guys have. I know that another lady has.
Jason, are you available?
We will wait on Jason then, and we'll go ahead to Michael.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Can
I
you
just want to
can I identify
express my
yourself, Mike?
great thanks to Dr. Schwartz. This was the second most important report on this topic, the first being the Vera report. Maybe that's unfair to this second report, but I mean, my goodness, that report was, I think, ground changing. And I think this one is equally important for all the reasons I think people will understand. So I just want to express my great appreciation. This is exactly the sort of thing we need to guide our policies and our spending and our programming. Thank you very much. My name is, by the way, I'm on the Bellingham City Council. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Great. Jason, would you like to try again? Okay. Would anyone else like to speak to the task force? Oh, Jason's back.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Jason.
Hello. Excellent. Thank you very much. Using the cell phone, having the same problems you guys do. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I just want to start by saying thank you for all the rhetoric. It's nice to finally hear input from other folks in the group. Eric, I'd ask you to just keep it focused on incarceration, reduction, prevention. I understand that you've got a lot of difficulties in your job. I can't imagine doing what you do. It's probably extremely difficult. But this group is to focus on incarceration and reduction and prevention. And I would ask that we look at this information and see what we can do with it to apply that to our community, incarceration, reduction, and prevention. I know there's a lot of bad things happening out there. I see it too. I don't like it. I talk to the people that are doing it, encourage them to stop. I would recommend and suggest that you guys do the same. Reach out and touch base with your community. Start talking to them one-on-one, let them know that you care, and they might care back too. Unfortunately, the mental health information that's referenced in the jail information in this report. I just can't say that it's entirely valid and not unentirely biased. It's gathered from the folks that create the information, create the charges. We have to remember that police choose what people get charged with. Crime and statistical data is very malleable. You can manipulate it. You can charge one person with 36 crimes. They only take one crime to avoid the other 35. All of that information is still out there, and it's still collected and used as data for this to show an increase or a decrease or whatever. I would recommend that you take that data with a grain of salt and say, let's reach out more to our community, talk to the people and see what they need, what kind of help they need to stay out of jail, what kind of help they need not to steal things. If you see somebody stealing something, ask them, what can we do to get you to stop stealing? Because we'd like to help. Let me see if I have anything else. I apologize. Nope, that's it. Thank you very much, guys. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate your sharing that perspective. Jenna, and anyone else?
Great. If anyone else would like to speak, please raise your hand now. All right, there are no more hands raised.
Very well. Well, thank you again for task force members and attendees who showed up on this special day. Thank you again to Dr. Schwartz and Dr. Sherman for your work and for taking the time to present to us. Reminder again, this is before County Council tomorrow. Another chance to hear more about this and possibly hear council members discuss it and see what their perspectives are. Barry, you want to add anything at the end?
I was just going to say what time that committee meeting started. That is 2:15 tomorrow afternoon.
Very good.
They're first up, so they'll be right at 2:15.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. With this, I'll adjourn the meeting.